The ornate silver hair combs felt heavier than lead in Eleanor's trembling hands as she pushed through the doors of Dr. Whitmore's office in Tombstone, Arizona, her younger brother Tommy burning with fever in her arms. It was October 1883, and the dusty mining town still buzzed with the aftermath of lawlessness, though the famous gunfight had happened 2 years prior. Eleanor had arrived just 3 months ago with Tommy, orphaned after their parents succumbed to cholera in St. Louis, carrying nothing but hope and the few precious belongings their mother had left behind. Those silver combs, intricately carved with roses and vines, had been her mother's wedding gift, the only beautiful things Eleanor owned, and now they represented her brother's only chance at survival, Dr. Whitmore looked up from his desk, his weathered face stern beneath wire-rimmed spectacles. He was a competent physician, but business was business in a town where death came cheaply and often. "Miss Hartley," he said, his voice clipped and professional, "your brother needs medicine, proper medicine. Quinine if it's malaria, laudanum for the pain, and a fever reducer. That will cost $15. $15 might as well have been $1,500. Eleanor worked as a seamstress in Mrs. Patterson's dress shop, earning barely enough for their room at the boarding house and the meager meals they shared. She had $2.30 to her name. "Please, doctor," she whispered, her voice breaking as Tommy's small body shuddered against her chest. He was only 8 years old, his face flushed crimson, his breathing shallow and rapid. "I have these combs. They're real silver imported from France. They were my mother's. They must be worth something." The doctor took the combs, examining them with a critical eye. They were indeed beautiful, the craftsmanship exceptional. He sighed, his stern expression softening slightly. "Miss Hartley, these are lovely, but I can't accept them as full payment. Perhaps they're worth $8 at most. You still need 7 more, and I can't extend credit. Too many people have left me with unpaid bills." Eleanor's vision blurred with tears. She had no jewelry left to sell, no other possessions of value. The combs were all she had. "Please," she begged, her voice barely audible. "He's all I have left in this world. Our parents are gone. I have no one else. I'll work for you, clean your office, anything you need." Behind her, the door opened, letting in a blast of hot desert air and the sound of boots on wooden floorboards. Eleanor didn't turn, too focused on the doctor's face, searching for any sign of mercy. A deep voice, rough around the edges but somehow gentle, spoke from behind her. "How much does the lady need?" Eleanor turned to find a tall cowboy standing in the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the afternoon sun. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, sun-bronzed skin, and eyes the color of coffee. He wore dusty leather chaps over denim trousers, a worn blue shirt, and a bandana tied loosely around his neck. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing a strong, angular face with a straight nose and a firm jaw shadowed with stubble. There was something striking about him, not conventionally handsome perhaps, but commanding in presence, the kind of man who looked like he belonged to the wild landscape surrounding them. "This isn't your concern, Mr. Dalton," Dr. Whitmore said, though his tone held respect. The cowboy, Dalton, stepped further into the office, his spurs jingling softly. His gaze moved from the doctor to Eleanor, taking in her worn calico dress, her pale face streaked with tears, and the small boy in her arms who was clearly desperately ill. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of emotion that Eleanor couldn't quite name. "I asked how much she needs," he repeated, his voice firmer now. $7, the doctor replied. "But James, you don't need to involve yourself in this." James Dalton reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Without hesitation, he counted out $7 bills and placed them on the doctor's desk. Then he picked up the silver combs and held them out to Eleanor. "These belong to you," he said simply. Eleanor stared at him, unable to comprehend what had just happened. "I can't accept this," she whispered, even as her arms tightened around Tommy. "I don't even know you. I have no way to repay you." Don't need repayment, James said, pressing the combs into her free hand. His fingers were calloused and warm, his touch surprisingly gentle. Your brother needs medicine. That's all that matters right now. Dr. Whitmore cleared his throat, already moving toward his medicine cabinet. Well then, let's get the boy examined properly. Miss Hartley, lay him on the table there. The next hour passed in a blur. Dr. Whitmore determined that Tommy had a severe fever likely caused by an infection, not malaria as feared. He administered medicine, showing Eleanor how to dose him properly over the coming days, and wrapped the boy in cool cloths to bring down his temperature. James Dalton stayed throughout the entire examination, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, his presence somehow reassuring in the small office. When Dr. Whitmore finally declared that Tommy should recover with proper care and rest, Eleanor felt her knees weaken with relief. She clutched the combs in one hand and cradled her sleeping brother with the other, finally allowing herself to breathe. "Thank you," she said to the doctor, then turned to James. "And thank you, Mr. Dalton. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness, but I swear I will find a way." James pushed off from the wall and retrieved his hat, settling it on his head. "Like I said, no repayment needed, but if you want to ease your conscience, you can let me walk you back to wherever you're staying. Tombstone isn't always friendly to women walking alone." Eleanor hesitated, but only for a moment. She was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained, and Tommy felt like a dead weight in her tired arms. "We're staying at Mrs. Kowalski's boarding house on Fremont Street," she said quietly. James nodded and held the door open for her. They walked in silence for the first block, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the dusty street. Tombstone was alive with activity, miners coming off their shifts, cowboys riding through town, women shopping for evening meals. The air smelled of horse and leather and the ever-present dust that seemed to coat everything in this corner of Arizona. "You're new to town," James said finally, breaking the silence. It wasn't a question. 3 months, Eleanor confirmed, adjusting Tommy's weight in her arms. "We came from St. Louis after our parents died. I had an aunt here, or so I thought. When we arrived, I learned she had passed 2 years prior. By then, we had no money to go back, not that there was anything to go back to." James's jaw tightened. "That's rough. You have work?" "I sew for Mrs. Patterson. She owns the dress shop near the Oriental Saloon. The pay isn't much, but it's honest work." Eleanor glanced at him, taking in his profile in the golden light. "What about you? You said your name is Dalton. Are you a rancher?" "Cowboy," he corrected. "I work at the Triple Crown Ranch about 10 miles outside of town. We run cattle, mostly. I come into Tombstone once a week for supplies and to see Dr. Whitmore about my shoulder." He rotated his left shoulder as if to demonstrate, and Eleanor noticed him wince slightly. "Old injury from a bad fall a year back. Acts up sometimes." They reached the boarding house, a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch. Eleanor turned to face James, suddenly aware of how much this stranger had done for her. "Mr. Dalton, I truly cannot express my gratitude. You saved my brother's life today." James looked uncomfortable with her thanks, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Just James is fine, and like I said, anyone would have done the same." "No," Eleanor said firmly, meeting his eyes. "Not anyone. Most people in this town look the other way when others are suffering. You didn't have to help us, but you did. That means something." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Eleanor felt something stir in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat. James had kind eyes, she realized, despite the hard edges that life on the frontier had carved into his features. There was something steady about him, something that made her feel safe for the first time since her parents had died. "I should get Tommy inside," she said finally, reluctantly breaking the moment. "But thank you again, James, for everything." James tipped his hat to her. "Take care of your brother, Eleanor." He paused, then added, "I'll be back in town next week. Might stop by the dress shop, see how the boy is doing, if that's all right with you." Eleanor felt her heart skip. "I would like that very much." She watched him walk away, his long stride eating up the dusty street before finally carrying Tommy inside. Mrs. Kowalski, a stout Polish woman with a heart bigger than her considerable frame, met her at the door. "The boy, he is better?" she asked anxiously. "He will be," Eleanor said, feeling tears of relief prick her eyes again, "thanks to a very kind stranger." Over the next 3 days, Eleanor barely left Tommy's side. She administered the medicine exactly as Dr. Whitmore had instructed, changed his sweat-soaked sheets, and coaxed him to drink water and eat thin broth. Mrs. Kowalski helped, bringing up meals and sitting with Tommy when Eleanor absolutely had to sleep. Slowly, miraculously, the fever broke. Tommy's color returned, his eyes grew clearer, and he even managed a weak smile when Eleanor told him he was going to be just fine. On the 4th day, Eleanor returned to work at the dress shop. Mrs. Patterson, a shrewd businesswoman with a surprisingly soft heart, had held her position and even brought by food during Tommy's illness. "You're a good worker, Eleanor," she had said. "I take care of my own." Eleanor was hemming an elaborate green silk dress when the bell above the shop door chimed. She looked up, her needle poised mid-stitch, and felt her breath catch. James Dalton stood in the doorway, looking distinctly uncomfortable, surrounded by bolts of fabric and feminine frippery. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "James," Eleanor said, setting down her sewing and rising to her feet. She was suddenly aware of how plain she must look in her simple brown work dress, her hair pinned back in a practical bun. "You came." "Said I would," he replied, his eyes finding hers across the shop. "How's Tommy?" "Much better. The fever broke 2 days ago. He's eating again, even getting restless from being in bed." Eleanor smiled, genuine joy lighting her features. "He's going to be fine, thanks to you." James's shoulders relaxed visibly. "That's good. That's real good." He hesitated, then said, "I was wondering if maybe when you have some free time you might let me buy you dinner. Nothing fancy, just the restaurant at the Grand Hotel. They make a decent steak." Eleanor's heart raced. She had thought about James constantly over the past few days, remembering his kindness, the gentle way he had pressed her mother's combs back into her hand, how safe she had felt walking beside him. But she had told herself not to hope for anything more. Men like James Dalton, strong and capable, could have their pick of women. Why would he be interested in a struggling seamstress with a sick brother to care for, yet here he was, standing in the dress shop asking her to dinner? "I would like that very much," she said softly. "But I can't leave Tommy alone in the evenings yet. He still needs care." "What if I brought dinner to you?" James suggested. "To the boarding house. Mrs. Kowalski could chaperone if that makes you more comfortable. I just want to spend some time with you, Eleanor, get to know you better." Mrs. Patterson, who had been pretending to organize fabric bolts while obviously listening to every word, spoke up. "Eleanor, you should accept. A gentleman caller is a blessing, especially one who clearly has honorable intentions." Eleanor felt her cheeks flush. "Then yes, James." "Tomorrow evening, perhaps? Around 7. The smile that spread across James's face transformed him, softening the hard lines and making him look younger, almost boyish. "Tomorrow at 7. I'll bring enough for all 3 of you, you and Tommy and Mrs. Kowalski." True to his word, James arrived the next evening carrying a basket laden with food from the Grand Hotel. Mrs. Kowalski had insisted they use her private parlor, a cozy room with faded floral wallpaper and comfortable chairs. Tommy, still weak but recovering, sat propped up with pillows, his eyes wide with curiosity about this cowboy who had saved his life. They ate roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread with butter, and apple pie for dessert. James entertained Tommy with stories about life on the ranch, about ornery cattle and clever horses, about sleeping under the stars and riding across open range. He had a gift for storytelling, making even mundane ranch work sound adventurous. Tommy hung on every word, laughing for the first time in weeks. But it was the way James looked at Eleanor that made her pulse quicken. His gaze kept returning to her, warm and attentive. He asked about her work, about her life in St. Louis before tragedy struck, about her dreams and hopes. He listened, really listened, as if every word she spoke mattered. "I always thought I would be a teacher," Eleanor admitted, surprising herself with the confession. "Before everything fell apart, I was studying, hoping to get certification. But then the cholera came, and my parents got sick so fast. By the time they passed, Tommy and I had nothing left. Everything went to pay for doctors and the burial plots." James reached across the small table and covered her hand with his. The touch sent electricity through Eleanor's entire body. "Maybe someday you still can be a teacher," he said. "Tombstone's growing. They'll need more schools, more teachers. Don't give up on your dreams, Eleanor." The evening flew by too quickly. When James finally stood to leave, Eleanor walked him to the door, acutely aware of Mrs. Kowalski and Tommy watching from the parlor. On the front porch, under the star-scattered sky, James turned to face her. "I'd like to see you again," he said, his voice low and earnest. "As often as you'll allow it. I know we just met, and I'm just a cowboy who spends most of his time chasing cattle, but there's something about you, Eleanor, something that makes me want to be a better man." Eleanor's heart swelled. "You're already a good man, James Dalton, one of the best I've ever known. And yes, I want to see you again, too." James smiled and gently squeezed her hand before releasing it. "I'll be back the day after tomorrow. Maybe we can take a walk if Tommy is well enough to spare you for an hour." Over the following weeks, James became a constant presence in Eleanor's life. He came to town more frequently than his usual weekly trips, always with some excuse about needing supplies or having business with Dr. Whitmore. They took walks through Tombstone in the early evening when the brutal heat had faded, talking about everything and nothing. James told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his own parents to Comanche raiders when he was 16, about drifting west and eventually finding work at the Triple Crown Ranch. The owner, Mr. Harrigan, he's a good man, James explained as they walked along the outskirts of town one evening in early November. The desert air had finally cooled, and Eleanor wore a shawl over her shoulders. "Gave me a chance when I was just a kid who knew how to ride but not much else. Taught me the cattle business, treated me fair. I've been with him 8 years now. He's even talked about selling me a piece of land, letting me start my own small herd." "You want your own ranch?" Eleanor asked, intrigued. "Someday," James said, his voice taking on a distant quality as if he were seeing something beyond the dusty street ahead of them. "Nothing huge, but something that's mine. A place to build a home, raise a family maybe. The ranching life is hard, but it's honest. A man can make something of himself out here if he's willing to work for it." Eleanor felt a flutter in her stomach at his mention of family. They had been spending time together for nearly a month now, and her feelings had deepened into something far beyond gratitude. She found herself thinking about James constantly, missing him when he returned to the ranch, counting the days until she would see him again. The way he treated Tommy, with patient kindness and genuine affection, only made her care for him more. But there was one thing troubling her, a debt unpaid that weighed on her conscience. One evening in mid-November, as they sat on a bench outside the dress shop after closing, Eleanor finally broached the subject. "James, about the money you paid Dr. Whitmore," she began, twisting her hands in her lap. "I know you said not to worry about repayment, but it bothers me. $7 is a considerable sum. I've been saving every penny I can spare from my wages. I have almost $3 now. I want to pay you back." James was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable in the gathering twilight. Then he said, "Eleanor, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't pay that money expecting to be repaid. I did it because seeing you so desperate, seeing that little boy so sick, it stirred something in me. Made me want to help, but more than that, it gave me a reason to talk to you, to get to know you. And now that I've spent these weeks with you, I can't imagine my life without you in it." Eleanor's breath caught. James turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I'm not a rich man," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. I have my wages and my savings, maybe enough to buy that land from Mr. Harrigan someday. But I'm a hard worker and I'm honest, and I would spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you and Tommy are safe and cared for. Eleanor Hartley, I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I already have. I know it's fast, maybe too fast, but out here life doesn't wait. I've seen too many people put off happiness only to have it snatched away. If you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I'm asking you to give me a chance. Give us a chance. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, but they were tears of joy. Oh, James, she whispered. I've been falling in love with you since the moment you handed me back my mother's combs. You're kind and generous and strong. You make me feel safe and cherished. Tommy adores you. I kept telling myself not to hope, that a man like you couldn't possibly want someone like me. A woman with nothing to her name but a sick brother and a handful of silver combs. James cupped her face with his hand, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. You're everything I want, he said fiercely. Your strength, your courage, the way you love your brother, the way you face each day despite everything you've lost. You're beautiful and smart and kind. Eleanor, you're worth more than all the silver in these mountains. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Eleanor didn't want to pull away. She had never wanted anything less. When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded, Eleanor felt like she was finally home. Not Tombstone, not the boarding house, but here in James Dalton's arms, this was where she belonged. They courted properly after that, with James declaring his intentions to Mrs. Kowalski and even getting Tommy's earnest approval. You'll marry him, won't you, Eleanor? Tommy asked one night as she tucked him into bed. He was fully recovered now, back to being an energetic 8-year-old boy. He's the best. He promised to teach me to ride a horse and everything. Eleanor laughed and kissed her brother's forehead. If he asks me, I will certainly say yes. James did ask, on a cool December evening as they stood watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple. He didn't have a ring yet, he explained, but he would get her the best one he could afford. Eleanor told him she didn't need a ring to know she wanted to be his wife. They set the date for January, giving them time to prepare and for James to talk to Mr. Harrigan about his future at the ranch. But one important matter still weighed on Eleanor's mind. 3 days before Christmas, she asked James to accompany her somewhere. She had Tommy stay with Mrs. Kowalski and led James to a small shop she had discovered tucked away on a side street. The sign above the door read, Sullivan's Fine Goods and Jewelry. Inside, an elderly man with spectacles greeted them. Miss Hartley, you've returned. Have you made your decision? Eleanor reached into her reticule and pulled out her mother's silver combs, the ones James had returned to her that first day. Her heart ached at the thought of parting with them, but this was important. Yes, Mr. Sullivan, I would like to sell them. Eleanor, no, James said immediately, understanding dawning on his face. Not for me, you don't need to do this. Yes, I do, Eleanor said firmly, meeting his eyes. These combs are all I have of value and they represent my mother's love. But James, you gave me something more valuable than any object. You gave me hope when I had none. You saved my brother's life. You've shown me what real love looks like. I want to do this. I need to do this. Not because I owe you a debt, but because giving you something meaningful, something that matters to me, is how I can show you what you mean to me. Mr. Sullivan cleared his throat delicately. The combs are indeed fine silver, French-made. I can offer $25 for them. Eleanor's eyes widened. $25 was far more than she had expected. It was more than enough to repay James the $7 and still have money left over. But as she looked at the combs one last time, running her fingers over the intricate rose pattern, she realized she didn't want to repay him. She wanted to give him something new, something that symbolized their future together. Mr. Sullivan, she said slowly, an idea forming. Do you have any men's pocket watches? The jeweler smiled knowingly and brought out a tray of watches. Eleanor's gaze fell on one immediately, a silver pocket watch with a cover that could be engraved. It was elegant but practical, exactly something James would use. How much is this one? $18 or $20 with engraving. Eleanor didn't hesitate. I'll take it. Can you engrave it to James with all my love, Eleanor? Christmas 1883. She completed the transaction, leaving with $5 in change and a promise that the watch would be ready in 2 days. James had remained silent throughout, but when they stepped outside, he pulled her into his arms, not caring who might see. You didn't have to do that, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Those combs were your mother's. And now they've served their purpose, Eleanor replied, tilting her face up to look at him. They kept me connected to my past, to my mother's memory. But James, you're my future. I want to look forward now, not backward. My mother would have liked you, she would have approved of this. James kissed her then, right there on the street in broad daylight, a kiss full of promise and love and hope for all the tomorrows stretching before them. Christmas arrived with surprisingly cool weather and even a bit of rain, a rare blessing in the desert. Eleanor gave James the pocket watch on Christmas Eve in Mrs. Kowalski's parlor with Tommy and the landlady as witnesses. When James opened the box and saw the watch, saw the engraving, his eyes grew suspiciously bright. Eleanor, this is too fine, he said, his voice rough. I don't deserve this. You deserve this and so much more, Eleanor said softly. Merry Christmas, James. James had his own surprise. From his pocket he pulled a small box and opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small but genuine diamond. I was saving this for our wedding day, he said, but I want you to have it now. I want everyone to know you're spoken for, that you've agreed to be my wife. He slipped the ring on her finger and Eleanor gasped. It fit perfectly, the diamond catching the lamplight. James, it's beautiful. But how did you afford this? I've been saving for years, he admitted. Every extra dollar from my wages that I didn't need for necessities. I always figured when I found the right woman I'd want to do it proper. And Eleanor, you're not just the right woman, you're the only woman. You're everything. They were married on January 15, 1884, in a small ceremony at the Tombstone Methodist Church. Tommy stood up as Eleanor's witness, bursting with pride in his new suit that James had bought for him. Mr. Harrigan served as James's best man, and Mrs. Kowalski wept happy tears throughout the entire ceremony. Mrs. Patterson closed the dress shop for the afternoon so she and her employees could attend, and even Dr. Whitmore came, smiling at the happy ending to the story that had begun so desperately in his office. Eleanor wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She had purchased new hair combs for the occasion, not as elaborate as her mother's silver ones, but pretty nonetheless, with small seed pearls decorating them. As she walked down the aisle toward James, who looked impossibly handsome in his best suit, his eyes shining with love, Eleanor felt her mother's presence, as if giving her blessing. They spoke their vows in steady, clear voices, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever trials life on the frontier might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her with such tenderness that Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. The reception was held at the Grand Hotel, with food and even a small band for dancing. Eleanor danced with James, with Tommy, with Mr. Harrigan, who insisted on welcoming her properly to the ranch family. James had arranged for them to spend their wedding night at the hotel in the finest room available before returning to their new home the following day, because James had another surprise for his bride. The week before the wedding, Mr. Harrigan had made good on his promise. He sold James 200 acres of Triple Crown land at a generous price, with favorable terms on a loan for the balance. It was good grazing land with a small creek running through it, located about 2 miles from the main ranch house. There was even a small cabin already on the property, used by line riders during cattle drives. It needed work, but it was sturdy and weathertight, and it was theirs. We have a home, James told Eleanor as they stood at the window of their hotel room, looking out at the star-filled sky. He stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, her back pressed against his chest. A real home, not just a rented room. A place where we can build our life together, where Tommy can grow up with space to run, where maybe someday our own children will play. Eleanor turned in his arms, her hands coming up to frame his face. You've given me everything, James. Family, security, love. I was so lost when I came to Tombstone, so scared and alone. And then you walked into that doctor's office and changed my entire world. We changed each other's world, James corrected, lowering his head to kiss her. I was just going through the motions before I met you, Eleanor, working, saving, but not really living. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to dream bigger. You and Tommy, you're my family now, my everything. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a celebration of their love and commitment. Eleanor had been nervous, but James was patient and gentle, making sure she felt cherished and safe. When they finally lay entwined in each other's arms in the early morning hours, Eleanor felt a completeness she had never known existed. They moved to the cabin a week later, with Tommy absolutely thrilled about their new home. It was rustic compared to the boarding house, with just 2 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen and a bedroom. But James had worked hard to make it comfortable, building a loft space for Tommy to sleep in, installing a proper stove, even constructing a covered porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. Life on the ranch was different from town living. Eleanor learned to cook over the wood stove, to manage a garden in the difficult desert soil, to preserve food for the winter months. James taught her to ride a horse, laughing good-naturedly when she fell off the first few times, then praising her profusely when she finally got the hang of it. Tommy thrived in the outdoor life, following James around like a shadow, learning about cattle and horses and ranch work. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to live together, learning each other's habits and quirks. But the foundation of love and respect they had built made even the difficult days manageable. James never came home too tired to greet Eleanor with a kiss, to ask about her day, to help with evening chores. Eleanor made their small cabin a home, with curtains in the windows, wildflowers in jars on the table, and hearty meals waiting when James came in from the range. Spring arrived with wildflowers carpeting the desert in unexpected color. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant in April, barely 3 months after their wedding. She was both thrilled and terrified, remembering how her own mother had suffered through difficult pregnancies. But Dr. Whitmore, who made the journey out to the ranch when Eleanor couldn't come to town, assured her she was healthy and strong. James was over the moon with joy when she told him. He immediately became overprotective, not wanting Eleanor to do any heavy lifting or strenuous work. "I'm pregnant, not broken," Eleanor laughed, but she was touched by his concern. He built a rocking chair for the baby, carved a cradle from pine wood, and started talking about adding another room to the cabin. Tommy, now 9 years old and growing like a weed, was excited about becoming an uncle. "I'll teach the baby everything," he declared. "How to ride, how to rope cattle, everything I'm learning from James." "The baby might be a girl," Eleanor pointed out. Tommy shrugged. "Girls can learn too. You learned to ride, didn't you?" Eleanor gave birth to a son in December 1884, almost exactly 1 year after James had given her the engagement ring. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following day. James paced outside the bedroom where Mrs. Kowalski and Mrs. Patterson attended Eleanor, looking like he had aged 10 years. When the baby's first cry finally split the air, James burst through the door, his face wild with fear and hope. "You have a son," Mrs. Kowalski announced, beaming, "and your wife, she is strong like ox, she did good." James rushed to Eleanor's side where she lay exhausted but radiant, their tiny son cradled in her arms. "He's perfect," Eleanor whispered. "Look at him, James, he has your eyes." James touched the baby's tiny hand with one calloused finger, his face full of wonder. "He's so small." "I'm afraid I'll break him." "You won't break him," Eleanor assured him. "Hold your son, James." Carefully, awkwardly, James took the baby, supporting his head the way Mrs. Kowalski instructed. The infant made a small sound and seemed to settle into his father's arms, and James looked at Eleanor with such love and amazement that she felt her heart might burst. They named him William, after James's father. William Dalton came into the world healthy and loud, with a shock of dark hair and a determined personality that showed itself from day one. Tommy was a devoted big brother, always wanting to hold the baby, to help with feedings, to rock him to sleep. The years that followed were full of hard work but rich with happiness. James's small herd grew steadily, his reputation as a fair dealer and skilled cattleman spreading throughout the territory. Eleanor eventually realized her dream of teaching, starting a small school in their expanded cabin for the ranch children and others from neighboring properties. Tommy grew into a fine young man, learning the cattle business and eventually working as a hand on the Triple Crown Ranch. When William was 3, Eleanor gave birth to twin daughters, Grace and Rose, named after both their grandmothers. James built a proper house then, a 4-bedroom structure with a real parlor and a dining room, and even indoor plumbing, a luxury in rural Arizona. The house was built on a hill overlooking their grazing land, with views of the mountains in the distance. One evening in the spring of 1891, 7 years after their wedding, Eleanor and James sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard below. William, now 6, was teaching his younger sisters how to stack rocks, his patience with them reminiscent of James's patience with Tommy all those years ago. Tommy, now 16 and nearly a man, was working late at the main ranch but would be home for supper. You ever think about that day in Dr. Whitmore's office? Eleanor asked, leaning against James's shoulder. They sat close together on the porch swing he had built, moving gently back and forth in the cooling air. Every day, James replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Best day of my life, walking through that door and seeing you. I didn't know it then, but my whole future was standing there, holding those silver combs. I sold those combs to buy you a watch, Eleanor reminded him with a smile. Do you still have it? James pulled the pocket watch from his vest, the same one Eleanor had given him that first Christmas. It was worn now, the silver tarnished slightly despite his care, but he carried it every day. Never leave home without it. It reminds me how blessed I am, how much you sacrificed because you loved me. It wasn't a sacrifice, Eleanor said firmly. Those combs represented my past, my loss. But you, James, you represented hope and a future. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. James turned to fully face her, his hand cupping her cheek. After 7 years of marriage, 3 children, countless days of hard work, and the inevitable struggles that came with frontier life, he still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. I love you, Eleanor Dalton. More now than even that first day, though I didn't think that was possible. I love you too, Eleanor whispered, forever and always. Their kiss was interrupted by squeals of laughter from the yard. William had apparently decided to demonstrate a new technique for rock stacking that involved throwing them instead, and the twins were delighted by this turn of events. James and Eleanor broke apart, laughing. I should probably stop that before someone gets hurt, James said, but he was smiling. In a minute, Eleanor said, catching his hand. Just sit with me a little longer. Listen to our children laugh, look at the home we've built. Remember where we started and marvel at where we are. So they sat together as the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks and purples. The cabin where they had started their married life was still visible from the porch, now used for storage but preserved as a reminder of humble beginnings. The land stretched out before them, marked with their cattle, their fences, their dreams made manifest. Tommy came home as the stars began to emerge, greeting his parents with a wave before swooping down to pick up his squealing sisters, one under each arm. William ran to him, chattering excitedly about his day. Inside the house, Eleanor had supper waiting, the table set for their family. As they gathered around that table, James said grace, thanking God for their blessings, for the food before them, for the family surrounding them. Eleanor listened to his steady voice, and thought about the desperate woman she had been, bartering her most precious possession for medicine to save her brother. She thought about the cowboy who had walked through a door and changed everything, who had paid the doctor and bought her new combs, who had given her not just material things but love and security, and a future beyond her wildest dreams. Their story had begun with silver combs and $7, with desperation and unexpected kindness. But it had grown into something magnificent, a love that weathered all storms, a partnership built on respect and devotion, a family that thrived despite the harsh realities of frontier life. Years later, when their children were grown and starting families of their own, when the ranch had expanded beyond James's early dreams, when Tombstone had transformed from a wild mining town into a more settled community, Eleanor would sometimes take out the new combs James had bought her that Christmas so long ago. They were simple compared to her mother's silver ones, but they meant so much more. She would hold them and remember that desperate October day, remember the tall cowboy with kind eyes, remember how love could bloom even in the hardest soil. She would remember and give thanks for every precious moment of the life they had built together. William eventually took over the ranch, running it with his father's integrity and his mother's compassion. The twins both became teachers like their mother, opening a proper schoolhouse in nearby Fairbank. Tommy married the daughter of a neighboring rancher and started his own spread, always remaining close to the family that had become his when his parents died. And through it all, James and Eleanor remained each other's constant, their love deepening with each passing year. They grew old together in the house on the hill, surrounded by children and grandchildren, by the fruits of their labor and the legacy of their love. On their 25th wedding anniversary, James presented Eleanor with a gift. When she opened the small box, she gasped. Inside were silver hair combs, intricately carved with roses and vines, almost identical to the ones her mother had owned, the ones she had been willing to barter for Tommy's medicine all those years ago. "James, how did you?" she began, tears filling her eyes. "I tracked down the jeweler who bought your mother's combs from Mr. Sullivan," James explained, taking her hand. "Took me 2 years to find him and another 3 to convince him to sell them back. But I wanted you to have them again, Eleanor. They're part of your history, part of our story. You should have never had to give them up." Eleanor threw her arms around her husband's neck, overwhelmed by emotion. "You wonderful, impossible man," she said through her tears. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," James replied, holding her close. "Because you gave up something precious for love, and I wanted to give it back to you. That's what we do, Eleanor. We give each other everything." That night, Eleanor wore her mother's combs to the anniversary celebration their children had organized. She danced with her husband under lantern light, surrounded by family and friends, the silver combs glinting in her hair. She was 63 years old, her hair streaked with silver, her face lined by years of sun and wind and laughter. And James, now 65, still looked at her like she was 18 and beautiful beyond measure. Because to him she was. She always would be. They lived long lives, James and Eleanor Dalton, dying within months of each other in their 80s, never wanting to face a world without their other half. They were buried on the hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under a sky as big and endless as their love had been. And in Eleanor's hair, arranged carefully by her daughters for her final rest, were the silver combs, the ones that had started everything, the ones that had come home at last. They represented sacrifice and love, desperation and hope, the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. They were a symbol of a cowboy who had walked through a door and paid a doctor's bill, who had bought new combs for a desperate woman and won her heart in the process. They were a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the smallest acts of kindness, and that true love, once found, endures forever. From bartering at a doctor's office to building an empire, from silver combs to golden years, James and Eleanor's story was one of enduring love, unwavering devotion, and the beautiful life that can grow when two hearts choose each other, again and again, through all the days of their lives.